So sometimes when income, so when we're looking at families and we input incomes of both of the spouses, when there's children, sometimes even though we might determine that somebody would be entitled to spousal support, the calculator spits out 0, 0, 0.
Yep.
So you and Carol Rogerson have been involved in developing the spousal support advisory guidelines. How is that possible?
Well, keep in mind the first thing, which is child support takes priority over spousal support. That's the law, has been the law for years, which means if you have one person makes 50,000, another person makes 70,000, and you say you've got 1 or 2 kids, once you pay child support, the $70,000 earner will have no money left over to be able to pay spousal support. So even though, let's say the person earning 50,000 at the end of the relationship has been home with the kids and is now back to work, the fact of the matter is, even though there's a claim, that a compensatory claim, I've disadvantaged myself by reason of being home with kids, once you pay child support, there's no money left over to pay spousal. And the ultimate limit on spousal support is ability to pay, right? So now the interesting part of it is if the parent with the primary care of the 2 kids makes $50,000 a year, you actually have to make something close to $90,000 a year before you can pay any spousal support at all. Like you make 70, 80, 85, those are still going to be zeros across the board with 2 kids.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's only when you hit 90,000 will some small amount start turning up for spousal support under this formula. That's because we have to give priority to the payment of child support for the children. Spousal support comes second. But just to be clear about this, if we have no kids at all and I make 50,000 and you make 70,000 a year, the odds are that on a needs basis there'd be no spousal support paid.
Right.
Because the difference between 50 and 70, we go, and the classic example would be a couple who've been married or living together for a number of years. They both pursue their careers. There's no time out of the labor force. Nobody moves to accommodate everyone else. Mm-hmm. And one person makes 40 or 50, the other person makes 70. Courts will quite often in those cases say there's no spousal support claim. You don't have a needs-based claim. And there's no disadvantage.
So, Professor Thompson, sometimes when we input these numbers, we'll get low, mid, and high. And a lot of the times people just kind of default to the midpoint, or, they'll see. So how can we determine within those ranges where one might fall? And can they fall outside those ranges?
Okay, there are a series of exceptions in the spousal support advisory guidelines for cases that might have to fall outside the ranges for amount or outside the ranges for duration for how long support is paid. But the ranges are quite broad under these formulas, under the spousal support advisory guidelines. So you have to think about where you land up within that and what kinds of things affect that. For example, if you have a strong compensatory claim, you've been really disadvantaged by the marriage, it's going to go up to the higher end of the range for amount. If, for example, the payor spouse is paying family debts from the time you were together, that may drive it much lower in the range to recognize the fact the payor is paying debts. Or, for example, if the recipient spouse has little or no income, then you may go higher in the range than if someone makes 50,000 a year. Because the need is so much greater. Or another example would be you have to recognize that both the payor and the recipient have obligations to go out to work. So you have to recognize that the payor, there has to be an incentive for the payor to go to work every day. And there has to be an incentive for the recipient as well to go out to work every day. So I'm just saying, again, sometimes that may mean you order a lower amount to say to the recipient, you're perfectly free to go out and work and make more and make yourself better off. Or to the payor spouse, you go, I know I'm pushing the upper limits of your ability to pay, so I'm going to back off a little bit to encourage you to keep working, say, overtime or shift work. So we have to take into account all those things and decide in the end where you wind up at the lower end of that range or the middle part of the range or the upper end of it. There's no automatic default, as you said, to the midpoint of the range for amount. Yep.
Yeah, and it's always, yeah, so it's always a really sensitive issue for people, but really important one to talk about and canvas fully. So again, thank you so much for your time and sharing that with us.
You're welcome.